In this video, we're going to study the second question of the Summa Theologica. In the first video, we studied question 1, which discussed the nature and extent of sacred doctrine and served as something of an introduction to the Summa Theologica itself. In question 2, we're going to read on the existence of God, which is really the question of all questions. We're going to study the existence of God, which is going to be investigated by St. Thomas in 3 articles, or through 3 separate questions. As he begins this second question, he provides an introduction that serves as a map for the layout and content of the Summa Theologica, and then we get into the question itself in Article 1. So let's read together. Question 2, on the existence of God. Because the chief aim of sacred doctrine is to teach the knowledge of God, not only as he is in himself, but also as he is the beginning of things and their last end, and especially of rational creatures, as is clear from what has been already said. Therefore, in our endeavor to expound this science of sacred doctrine, first, we shall treat of God. Second, we shall treat of the rational creature's advance towards God. And third, we shall treat of Christ, who as man is our way to God. So there are 3 main divisions of the Summa Theologica, which are stated there. In treating of God, which is the first part, there will be a 3-fold division. First, we shall consider whatever concerns the divine essence. Whatever concerns the divine essence. That's the first part of our study of God in the Summa. Second, whatever concerns the distinction of persons. And third, whatever concerns the issue of creatures from him. Those are the 3 parts of the study of God in the Summa Theologica. Concerning the divine essence, we must consider first whether God exists. Second, the manner of his existence, or rather, what is not the manner of his existence. And third, whatever concerns his operations, namely his knowledge, will, and power. Concerning the first, whether God exists, 3 points are to be discussed. First, whether the proposition God exists is self-evident. Second, whether the proposition God exists is demonstrable or can be demonstrated. And third, whether God exists. So 3 articles of question 2. Whether the proposition God exists is self-evident, whether the proposition God exists is demonstrable, and third, whether God exists. The first article, whether the existence of God is self-evident. Now this is obviously important because in speaking to others and dealing with others, it's not reasonable for us to demand that this fact be conceded that God exists if it in fact is not self-evident, right? So it's very important for us to know whether the existence of God is self-evident. St. Thomas lists a few objections to the Catholic teaching on the issue, and then says, on the contrary, no one can mentally admit the opposite of what is self-evident. No one can mentally admit the opposite of what is self-evident, as is clear from the philosopher Aristotle, concerning the first principles of demonstration. The opposite of the proposition God is can be mentally admitted. The opposite of the proposition God is can be mentally admitted. For we read in Psalm 52, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. Therefore, the fact that God exists is not self-evident. Okay, now it's very interesting to see there that in establishing Catholic doctrine, or in proving Catholic doctrine, St. Thomas considers the philosopher, the pagan Aristotle, to be an authoritative source. Now, he's not an authoritative source on faith and morals, or he's not an authoritative source on the content of the Catholic faith. But as St. Thomas says, concerning the first principles of demonstration, concerning the art of reasoning, Aristotle is authoritative, and what he teaches is true. And the teaching of Aristotle on reasoning is used to establish this doctrine, that the existence of God is not self-evident. Okay? St. Thomas goes on to say, I answer that a thing can be self-evident in either of two ways. On the one hand, a thing may be self-evident in itself, though not self-evident to us. On the other, a thing may be self-evident in itself and self-evident to us. A proposition is self-evident because the predicate is included in the notion of the subject. Now, one thing I ask students on the assessments for lessons in the Summa Theologica is that they list authorities that St. Thomas refers to in his writing. So Aristotle would be an example of an authority that is quoted. We've seen St. Augustine quoted. We've seen Dionysius. We've seen sacred scripture, a number of different sources so far. But another question I ask is for students to list any universal principles that St. Thomas reasons from in his arguments in the Summa. And here's a good example. A proposition is self-evident because the predicate is included in the notion of the subject. St. Thomas begins with that universal principle. A proposition is self-evident because the predicate is included in the notion of the subject. And then he uses that principle to answer questions. Okay, that's the knowledge that we're seeking to gain through our study of the Summa. Not just St. Thomas's answers, which are wonderful in themselves, but also the method that St. Thomas uses, the sources and the arguments, the principles that he uses to answer these questions. That's what we really want to learn. We want to not only say what St. Thomas says, but we want to know how to answer new questions using the method and principles that St. Thomas used when he was asked questions. Okay? So that's an example of a principle that's worth jotting down. A proposition is self-evident because the predicate is included in the notion of the subject. And he gives an example here. If we say that man is an animal, for animal is contained in the formal idea of man. How so? Well, the definition of the word man is that man is a rational animal. All right? When we say man is an animal, man is a rational animal. The idea of animal is contained in the idea of man. If therefore the essence of the predicate and of the subject are known to all, then the proposition will be self-evident to all, as is clear with regard to the first principles of demonstration, the art of reasoning. the terms of which are common things that no one is ignorant of, such as being and non-being, whole and part, and such like. If there are some to whom the essence of the predicate and subject are unknown, the proposition will be self-evident in itself, but not to those who do not know the meaning of the predicate and subject of the proposition. So just because something is not known to an individual or is not self-evident to an individual doesn't mean that it's not self-evident. It may be self-evident to one who knows, for example, the art of reasoning. Okay? Therefore, it happens, as Boethius says, there's another source, Boethius, that there are some mental concepts self-evident only to the learned or properly educated, as that incorporeal substances are not in space. There's an example of something that a person who's received a classical liberal arts education would understand and know to be self-evident, but someone who's not well educated wouldn't know that that's true. Therefore, I say that the proposition God exists of itself is self-evident, for the predicate is the same as the subject, because God is his own existence. For as much as we do not know the essence of God, the proposition is not self-evident to us, but needs to be proved by such things as are more evident to us, though less evident in their nature, namely by his effects. So the answer to the first question, which is whether God exists, is self-evident, St. Thomas shows us that this can be a complicated question, because there's two different ways in which things are said to be self-evident. They're self-evident in themselves, but not to us, and self-evident both in themselves and to us. Okay? The statement God exists is not necessarily self-evident to all men. The fool says in his heart there is no God. But the learned, the well-educated in either philosophy, the art of reasoning, and the faith itself, the learned will see that the statement God exists is self-evident. Okay, that's article number 1 in question 2. On to article number 2. Whether it can be demonstrated that God exists. Whether it can be demonstrated that God exists. After listing a few objections to true Catholic teaching, St. Thomas says, the Apostle Paul says in Romans 1, verse 20, the invisible things of God are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. It's quite an interesting statement. The invisible things of God. The invisible things are clearly seen. That's an interesting statement to think about. God is invisible, that's true, but at the same time, God is clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. And this, again, is a quote from Romans chapter 1. This would not be unless the existence of God could be demonstrated through the things that are made. In other words, St. Paul's statement would be false if God's existence could not be demonstrated. So Paul's statement in Romans 1 verse 20 proves that the existence of God can be demonstrated. The first thing we must know of anything is whether it exists. I answer that demonstration can be made in two ways. And here St. Thomas is just drawing from his mastery of the classical liberal arts. These are the lessons of classical reasoning. Demonstration can be made in two ways. One is through the cause, which is called a priori, and this is to argue from what is prior absolutely. The other is through the effect, and this is called a demonstration a posteriori. This is to argue from what is prior, relatively only to us. When an effect is better known to us than its cause, from the effect we proceed to the knowledge of its cause. From every effect, the existence of a proportionate cause can be demonstrated, so long as its effects are better known to us. Since every effect depends upon its cause, if the effect exists, the cause must have pre-existed. Hence, the existence of God, insofar as it is not self-evident to us, can be demonstrated from those of his effects which are known to us. So can the existence of God be demonstrated? St. Thomas answers yes. The existence of God can be demonstrated by means of the things that exist, the effects of God's existence. And as a proof of this, he provides the quote from Romans chapter 1, verse 20. The invisible things of God are clearly seen, being understood from the things that have been made, from the effects of the existence of God. That's St. Thomas's answer to article number 2, whether the existence of God can be demonstrated. Now we move on to the third article, which is one of the most famous parts of the Summa Theologica, because St. Thomas provides us with the actual demonstrations to prove that God exists. Okay, so if you want to know whether God exists, this is where you begin to look for the answer from the Church. Article number 3 of question 2 in part 1 of the Summa Theologica. Whether God exists. St. Thomas provides 2 objections to Catholic teaching and then says, on the contrary, it is said in the person of God, I am who am. And this is a quote from Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. I am who am. St. Thomas says, I answer that the existence of God can be proven in 5 ways. The existence of God can be proven in 5 ways. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that some things are in motion. Whatever is in motion is moved by another. Now you see there, that's another one of these universal principles. Okay? Where does St. Thomas learn that whatever is in motion is moved by another? You see how he has these principles in his mind. And when he's asked a question, or when he's faced with a problem, he turns to these principles and allows them to guide him to the answers. Whatever is in motion is moved by another. And I challenge you to find out, where did he learn that from? Where does that knowledge come from? Where does St. Thomas get these principles from which he reasons and draws conclusions when he faces complicated theological questions? All right? I'll give you a hint. It's from studying the classical liberal arts and classical philosophy and divine revelation. Okay? Whatever is in motion is moved by another. For nothing can be in motion except it have a potentiality for that towards which it is being moved. Whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act. By motion, we mean nothing else than the reduction of something from a state of potentiality into a state of actuality. Nothing, however, can be reduced from a state of potentiality into a state of actuality unless by something already in a state of actuality. Thus, that which is actually hot, as fire, makes wood, which is potentially hot, to be actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. It is not possible that the same thing should be at once in a state of actuality and potentiality from the same point of view, but only from different points of view. What is actually hot cannot simultaneously be only potentially hot. Still, it is simultaneously potentially cold. It is therefore impossible that from the same point of view and in the same way anything should be both moved and the mover, or that it should move itself. Therefore, whatever is in motion is put in motion. Whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. If that by which it is put in motion be itself put in motion, then this also must needs be put in motion by another, and that by another again. This cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover, and consequently no other mover, seeing that subsequent movers only move inasmuch as they are put in motion by the first mover, as the staff only moves because it is put in motion by the hand. Therefore, it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other, and this first mover, put in motion by no other, everyone understands to be God. Okay, so the first way of proving or demonstrating the existence of God, we can say, is the argument from the first mover. Okay? The second way is from the formality of efficient causation. The second way is from the formality of efficient causation. In the world of sense, we find that there is an order of efficient causation. Notice he said in the world of sense, in the physical world. In the world of sense, we find there is an order of efficient causation. There is no case known in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself, for so it would be prior to itself, which is impossible. In efficient causes, it is not possible to go on to infinity, because in all efficient causes following in order, the first is the cause of the intermediate cause, and the intermediate is the cause of the ultimate cause, whether the intermediate cause be several or one only. To take away the cause is to take away the effect. Therefore, if there be no first cause among the efficient causes, there will be no ultimate cause, nor any intermediate cause. If in efficient causes it is possible to go on to infinity, there will be no first efficient cause. Neither will there be an ultimate effect, nor any intermediate efficient causes, all of which is plainly false. Therefore, it is necessary to put forward a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name of God. So the second proof is the proof based on first efficient cause, God being the first efficient cause. The third way. The third way of proving the existence of God is taken from possibility and necessity, and runs thus. We find in nature things could either exist or not exist, since they are found to be generated and then to corrupt, and consequently they can exist and then not exist. It is impossible for these always to exist, for that which can one day cease to exist must at some time have not existed. Therefore, if everything could cease to exist, then at one time there could have been nothing in existence. If this were true, even now there would be nothing in existence, because that which does not exist only begins to exist by something already existing. Therefore, if at one time nothing was in existence, it would have been impossible for anything to have begun to exist, and thus even now nothing would be in existence, which is absurd. Therefore, not all beings are merely possible, but there must exist something the existence of which is necessary. Every necessary thing either has its necessity caused by another or not. It is impossible to go on to infinity in necessary things, which have their necessity caused by another, as has been already proved in regard to efficient causes. Therefore, we cannot but postulate the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity, and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity, and this all men speak of as God. I'll repeat that last line. We cannot but postulate the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity, and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity, and this is God. The fourth way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. Among beings, there are some more and some less good, true, noble, and the like. But more and less are predicated of different things, according as they resemble in their different ways something which is in the degree of most, as a thing is said to be hotter, according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest or most hot. So that there is something which is truest, something best, something noblest, and consequently something which is uttermost being. For the truer things are, the more truly they exist. What is most complete in any genus is the cause of all in that genus. As fire, which is the most complete form of heat, is the cause whereby all things are made hot. Therefore, there must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection, and this we call God. There must also be something which is to all beings the cause of their being, of their goodness, and of every other perfection, and this we call God. And lastly, the fifth way. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. For we see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for some purpose, which fact is evident from their acting always, or nearly always, in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. Hence it is plain that not fortuitously, not by chance, but designedly do they achieve their purpose. Whatever lacks intelligence cannot fulfill some purpose unless it is being directed by some being endowed with intelligence and knowledge, as the arrow is shot to its mark or target by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists, by whom all natural things are ordained towards a definite purpose, and this intelligent being we call God. That's the end of St. Thomas's answer to the third article of question 2. So, in Article 1, just to review here, in Article 1, we discussed whether the existence of God is self-evident, and the answer to that was sort of yes and no. It's self-evident with respect to itself, but not necessarily to us. Okay, and St. Thomas explained that. And then we went on in the second article, whether it can be demonstrated that God exists, and St. Thomas very clearly said yes. The existence of God can be demonstrated from the things which are made. And he quoted Romans 1, St. Paul, as proof of that. And then turning to the demonstration itself in Article 3, St. Thomas asked whether God exists, and he said, yes, we can provide 5 proofs that God exists. 5 proofs. So what St. Thomas is essentially saying in this third article is that these are the proofs that St. Paul referred to in Romans chapter 1. These are the proofs by which God can be known to exist from the things which have been made. First, we read the first and most manifest way, St. Thomas says, I'll read the end of that first part. He says, therefore it is necessary to arrive at a first mover, put in motion by no other, and this everyone understands to be God. The second way, St. Thomas said, it is necessary to put forward a first efficient cause, to which everyone gives the name God. The third way, St. Thomas says, we cannot but postulate the existence of some being having of itself its own necessity and not receiving it from another, but rather causing in others their necessity, and this all men speak of as God. The fourth way, there must be something which is to all being the cause of their being, of their goodness, and of every other perfection, and this we call God. And then lastly, some intelligent being must exist by whom all natural things are ordained towards a definite purpose, and this being we call God. These are the 5 ways of demonstrating the existence of God provided by St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay? That's all for question number 2 in part 1 of the Summa Theologica. I hope that's a helpful introduction, helpful in getting you through the first reading. Now you need to go back and study this question for mastery and demonstrate that mastery with the lesson assessment. I hope that's helpful. God bless your studies.